And now we're up to question and answer. So just a reminder that we're audio recording this section of the session, well, the whole session, but this part is audio recorded as well. So your voice will be heard on the audio recording. We'll post the recording on the RISE website. And just a reminder that we can't answer policy questions. If you have policy questions, please direct them to the ministry. But we're happy to, as individuals, answer any of your questions as best we can or point you towards appropriate resources. And if you have thoughts about how RISE can better help you, then we're certainly happy to hear that. And as you heard Karen say, the ministry more generally is very open to feedback on what the OHT Central Program of Supports can do. So questions or comments? Do we have any online, Karen?
No online questions yet, but just a reminder for about the 20 people who have called in, if you do have a question that you would like answered, can you please send it to rise, R-I-S-E, at mcmaster.ca, and I can monitor that as well. Thanks.
Yeah, so if they're looking at a laptop or a computer, they can send it in through the chat box, right? But if they're on a phone, it might be easier to send it to rise at mcmaster.ca. Yeah, so just send in your questions, comments. For those in the room, questions or comments? Particular focus on teams in development and in discovery. Yep.
Hi, John. Mike Baker from Temiskaming Hospital. There seems to be quite a playbook laid out for those in full application mode,
yep.
And not as much information available for the path that's expected for in-development teams.
Yep.
And some webinars have helped to fine-tune that a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about the timelines and some of the expectations that we should be aware of as we go through the in-development? Because I see it as a multiple thing where we still have to be aware of filling a full application at some point in the future, but at the same time, there's no reason why we can't start operating like an OHT
absolutely.
Today.
Absolutely. So I agree very much. I would encourage you to continue to move down the path of putting in place the building blocks, taking some steps to think about the priority populations. Meanwhile, my understanding is that the ministry is trying to work through a very transparent process about what would be required to trigger your movement into the full application. So I've heard them say a number of times you will not need to fill out a new self-assessment, but you will be encouraged to take steps to act on any feedback you've received, and at some point they will share a very clear process for what you need to do to get over into that full application process. But in the meantime, keep pushing. A lot of this work, I think teams invited to full application would love to have the additional months to get a lot more ducks in the row and to tackle very tough things like the primary care provider engagement. You have the luxury of a bit more breathing space, and then I think what will happen is sooner than later the ministry will explicitly articulate that process, and then you'll know what you need to do for the next step.
So there's no October 9th for the in-development?
There is not that I have ever seen, no. So the one deadline that is clear is October 9th for full teams. The other thing that I have heard is that the ministry will be communicating with teams in development about what will be required of you to get into that that full application process. But as I've said, you will not need to fill out the self-assessment again. It will be a matter of going through whatever that clear process is to trigger that movement to full application. But as I said before, when I see what teams are going through, I would love to have the extra few months. So I would just encourage you not to lose the momentum. Keep going, and then you're going to be in even better shape to move fast. The teams that suddenly found out that they were invited to full application, they're now trying to move incredibly fast, and this is very complex, and it has many moving parts, and it has parts that are new to many of us, and it has parts that are politically very difficult, including the primary care provider engagement and the engagement of the smaller community-based organizations. So these extra months that you have are a time that could be very well spent. Other questions, comments? Anything else online? No, my goodness, such a quiet group. So we'll wait for another few minutes. Otherwise, we can close the WebEx session, and then for those who are in the room, we can pick up the conversation at a smaller group level. But for those who are on the line, let me just give you another minute or two. Any questions, comments? This is just a good time to raise issues. There's no stupid questions. Don't feel bad if you miss something. And if you have thoughts about how to do things better or differently, we're certainly all ears. If you have any advice for us about how to support you better, very open to hearing that. Yep.
Mike again.
Yeah.
Just wondering as we move through this
Yep.
and the relationship with RISE.
Yep.
So how do we become engaged with RISE for the resources that you have? And as we start moving down the path ourselves and need help with governance or any of the 8 building blocks, who do we contact? How do we get a hold of you guys?
So the ministry, as Karen alluded to, would like to have the central program of supports remain centrally coordinated. So they've identified a contact person for every team. Their preference is that the request goes in through the central program of supports. In a number of circumstances, we might be the most appropriate person, but as you also heard Karen say, over time they're going to be adding other supports. So it could be 2 months from now, they have a group that can provide coaching, for example, on collaborative governance. So you might write in and say, hey, we'd like to talk to John and his colleagues about collaborative governance. And they might say, you know, John would be the first person to say that he and the RISE team are no longer the best people because we now have this. Would you be interested in speaking to these other partners? So the best way to access the central program is contact that relationship manager, and they'll direct you in the right place. But we have a regular, like we are in constant contact with them. So if you identify need and we're the right person, it will come to us, and then we'll move as quickly as we can to get the right resource. And then, as I mentioned before, one of the other things we're hoping to do with RISE is have this big group of folks, some that are going to be in your part of Ontario, others that might be in other parts, sometimes it's us, but we want to try and do that matching. You know, for folks that are like us, that are more on the research side, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work with local teams to just make such a huge difference in the lives of Ontario. And so many of my colleagues across the province are happy to put their hand up and say, we'll help. We just need to understand what would be helpful to you, and we need to make sure that they understand what constraints you're working under, you know, what timelines you're working under, how to add value, because what we don't want to do is just kind of distract you from the trajectory that you're already on. We want to get you the right person or resources or webinar or whatever would be most helpful at the right time. France.
If you look at the list of the 41, the one that comes from the north, you will see that they are mainly located in smaller communities. So the big one, the North Bay, the Sudbury got their go-ahead.
Yep.
And there's this reluctancies for smaller communities to go ahead because initially we were told that there would be a limited amount of Ontario health teams. We all did the math and realized that that means hundreds of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. And for communities in the north, right, except for Sudbury and North Bay, none of us live in 100,000 people communities. So why should they do this work right now?
Yep. Well, I guess, you know, within the next 10 days, the teams have been invited to full application are going to understand who their attributed population is. And if that utilization and referral network encompasses one or more of these smaller teams, then I think that there would be a collective hope that that conversation would be opened up to say, can we make this something that you would be excited about contributing to? But if, on the other hand, the naturally occurring network is relatively independent, my view would be then they should proceed, because that's where patients are choosing to go for care right now, and that's where local providers are choosing to refer their patients for care. So if what's happening, it meshes with the local network, then you have an incredibly strong argument. So then that to me is a no-brainer. Then you go down that path. But if it turns out that you feel that the community feels like it wants to say, no, we'd like to make a strong argument for why that won't work, and here's the data backing it up, and here's other things, my understanding is the ministry would be very open to hear that. So I would suggest that wait for the next week to 10 days, see what the maps look like for the players that have been approved to move to full application, and then open up that conversation about should some of them be invited in, and if not, then what are the very strong arguments that they want to put back to the ministry to make the case for remaining independent. Does that make sense?
It does very much so. It is a little bit dependent upon this body of research on
It
data
is.
being made available to other groups.
It is,
Which will,
absolutely.
cross our fingers, hopefully will
Yep.
become available to all.
Absolutely. And, as I said before, we're all kind of learning and figuring it out as we go. And I think we're in the last week or so, we've all suddenly started to realize just how critical understanding these naturally occurring care access patterns are. And so, as of this past week, I would say that would be the best thing, is see where those maps point you towards.
Thank you.
So we're from the Temiskaming
Yep.
Health Team, and our group, to your point, France, is we've covered pretty much from Kirkland Lake down to Temagami,
Yep.
and we've had a collaborative for many years now. So we've
Super.
been working together. So
Fantastic.
I think that's why we got into in development.
Super.
But we felt the same way, that we wanted to represent, even though we have strong referral patterns to Timmins, Sudbury, and North Bay for tertiary care and secondary care, that it was important for us to take care of our clients locally
Yeah.
first,
Yep.
and at least put a stake in the ground, regardless of whether there were population goals or not. So
Super.
that's sort of the way we did it. And by going together, maybe our biggest community is 10, 12,000 people. Well, now we're 35,000, which
Wow.
still doesn't come close to the number,
Yeah.
but it makes us have some kind of a priority, I think.
Yeah. But, as I said in the last session, I've never heard a minimum number set. I mean, it does make sense it has to be a certain size, because you don't want to be so small that all it takes is a couple of sick patients and suddenly you don't have enough money for the rest of the folks. But the attribution model, what drives it is primary care first and foremost. So if your community's primary care needs are primarily met by the region that you're focusing on, chances are that's what the map's going to show, in which case that would be a logical grouping. You don't want to design your Ontario Health Team based on your tertiary care referral patterns. Don't worry about that. That's going to be dealt with in a different way. This is primarily about people's primary care needs, and then, kind of incrementally into secondary care, but it's really the primary care that first and foremost drives the attributed population. So it sounds like, based on what you described, there's a good chance that your map will actually be what you've proposed, in which case it doesn't matter what your size is, and you seem like you have a very robust population size. But that's where people are choosing to go now, so that's what matters. Yes, Carrie.
Is there a resource that lists the team members for the OHTs that have been invited to full application?
That lists the full team members? Yeah, no, not that I'm aware of. So I think that the ministry obtained approval to list the names of the teams and the principal contact, but not for the broad array of participating partners. And for some of them, the list is 20, 30 providers long. But as far as I know, I know that what is available now is what they have approval from the teams to provide, which is just a contact, not the list of all participating partners. Other questions or comments? So let's do a last call on WebEx before, and then we can, and Carrie, my understanding is now that we've done the third session, we can actually close off WebEx, is that right? We've had to keep it open all day because of the session. So any final questions or comments there? François Pierre, not a single question in French to you. All right, so thank you very much to those of you who joined remotely. We're very grateful. So don't hesitate to send feedback to us, rise@mcmaster.ca. Think about joining the community of practice. And if you have any questions in French, rest assured that we will get back to you in French, and we also will be able to facilitate the community of practice in French. So thank you for joining us. So for those in the room, so we've had a few of you introduce yourself, but can we just start again? Would you mind introducing yourself? Can you just, we don't need the mic any longer.